Guys, I know it's been a minute, but I'm back like Francis Ngannou, and this was just too good of a card to pass up. So I'm going to come at you guys with some quick main card predictions. December 8th, Holloway versus Ortega, highly anticipated matchup. I'm not going to bore you with the details of why I've been gone for so long. Let's just say that when YouTube takes down a video that has 4 million views, a creator has a tendency to maybe, lose a little bit of motivation. But I'm just going to put all that behind me because we have truly been blessed with this card. From top to bottom, it's pretty stacked, and there's a lot of interesting fights. I'm only going to do the main card here, like I said, but if you guys are wondering my opinions on any undercard fights, just ask me in the comments, and I'll give you a pretty good prediction on those too. So without any further ado, let's get right into this great main card. So right off the bat, we have a really fun matchup, Jimi Manuwa versus Thiago Santos. Personally, I was really excited for this card when they first announced it, so I was bummed out when it got canceled, but I'm really glad they found a way to make it happen again. So in terms of this matchup here, Jimi Manuwa and Thiago Santos, really scary strikers with a lot of knockout power. I would say Thiago Santos is the more versatile striker. He's got more striking skills with his wheel kicks, roundhouses, and also his punches. They're all very dangerous. With Jimi Manuwa, I'd say it's mostly in his boxing. He's got a killer left hook, and if he lands it, he can put anyone to sleep. Knocked out Corey Anderson and OSP with that same punch. But the thing about Jimi is, and I know I say this about a lot of guys, but with Jimi, it's especially true, especially in the Jan Blachowicz fight, his last fight. His chin is very, very deteriorated. All of his losses, well, most of his losses have been by knockout, and in all of his losses, he's gotten hurt badly. The guy, I mean, he's like 40-something years old. He's been fighting for a while. His chin is not there anymore. Sure, he still has knockout power. He still has speed. But if Thiago Santos touches him with anything, I think he's going to get hurt and knocked down. Now, having said that, Thiago Santos, I thought he was going to be the next guy at middleweight. But when David Branch came in there and knocked him out, that actually really surprised me. So I would have to say that Thiago has a little bit of a suspect chin as well. But in his last fight against Eric Anders, he took a lot of punishment from another big, powerful guy, and he didn't go down. He got the win. So in this matchup, I think that literally all Thiago has to do is just touch Jimi with something powerful early, and he'll go down. He will be able to finish it. Now, Thiago, like I said, he looked great in his last fight, but in the fight before that against Kevin Holland, he looked kind of slow and lackadaisical and couldn't really get anything done. But in this fight, I think we're going to get a tough, strong, motivated version of Thiago, and I think he's going to be able to take Jimi out by knockout. Next up, we have another fun fight, Hakeem Dawodu versus Kyle Bochniak. As probably all of you know, Kyle is coming off a Fight of the Night performance against Zabit. Although he did lose that fight, he actually looked really good. And Hakeem is coming off of a win over Austin Arnett just a couple months ago. The thing about Hakeem is he had a lot of hype in his UFC debut. First of all, don't pay any attention to these records. They're all wrong on most of these fights. So, like I said, Hakeem had a lot of hype coming into his UFC debut. Because of his striking background, a lot of people thought he was going to win by knockout. But in the span of about 30 seconds, he got knocked out and submitted. He showed that he's really, really green on the ground. Now, in his last fight against Austin Arnett, yes, he has good striking, good body work, keeps his distance very well, but he's very green on the ground. And in Kyle Bochniak, you have a dude from up north, really good wrestler. He can stuff takedowns and get his own takedowns as well. And in the Zabit fight, he got tagged a lot by spinning back kicks, punches, everything, and he ate it all. And I would say that Zabit is most likely a more powerful man than Hakeem. So if Kyle Bochniak can take that punishment, I'm not really that worried about Hakeem getting the knockout or hurting Kyle. And even if Kyle does get hurt, just like most wrestlers, he's going to be able to revert back to his takedowns and get Hakeem into a place where he's not comfortable fighting at all. And Kyle Bochniak, as we know, has a really good gas tank. He didn't really gas against Zabit. Honestly, I would say Zabit was probably getting more tired in that fight. So in this fight versus Hakeem, I do think Kyle's going to probably throw down and try to strike, maybe try to please the fans because he is that type of fighter. But he's definitely going to be a smart fighter as well, and if things start not going his way on the feet, he's going to revert back to his wrestling, and he has a strong advantage over Hakeem in terms of ground fighting. So I could see Kyle either winning by decision, by grinding out Hakeem with the wrestling, or getting a submission. So I've got Kyle Bochniak here. I'm assuming he's going to be an underdog, but I've got Kyle. Next up on the main card, we have the long-awaited return of Gunnar Nelson. He's taking on Alex Oliveira, who's on a very impressive win streak of his own. This fight, I kind of think the matchmakers probably handpicked for Gunnar to get back on the winning track, because Alex Oliveira, if you look at his record, a lot of his losses are by submission, and he does seem to struggle on the ground with guys that have better submission credentials than he does. But I kind of think that if their motivation was to get Gunnar a win here, Alex Oliveira might not have been the best guy to choose, because Alex hasn't lost by submission in like 8 fights, and he's a guy to me that has vastly improved in a short amount of time. Like in the past 2 years, he's become twice as good of a fighter as he was before. And as we know, Gunnar Nelson has taken a long time off. What is it, like over a year now at this point? And in his last fight, he did get knocked out by Santiago Ponzinibbio. And to give Gunnar a little bit of credit, he did get poked in the eye twice and his shorts grabbed, like leading up to the knockout in that fight. But Alex Oliveira is going to be a really tough guy. The last time that Alex lost was against Yancy Medeiros, and that was a fight of the night performance. Some people even think fight of the year. But Gunnar Nelson, in my opinion, does not have the skill set to put that same type of insane pressure on Alex that Yancy did. In my opinion, also Alex's reach advantage here. He has like a 5.5 or 4.5 inch reach advantage, and I think that's going to play a big factor into the striking. Alex seems to have gotten a lot more confident in his striking in his past couple fights. I mean, if you look at his fight with Ryan LaFleur, on paper, Ryan was supposed to just take Alex down and hold him down for an entire fight, which is what some people think Gunnar's going to do. But Alex just landed a clean punch and knocked him out cold. And unfortunately for people that are supporting Gunnar Nelson here, I think probably the same thing is going to happen, especially since Gunnar's taken this much time off. So in this fight, I'm honestly not sure who's going to be the dog in this fight, but I've got Alex Oliveira by early knockout here. Next up for the co-main event, we have Valentina Shevchenko versus Joanna Jedrzeczyk for the women's flyweight title. In my opinion, this is for the inaugural title, because that fake TV show belt that Nico won by, winning some reality TV garbage, that doesn't actually count for a UFC championship, especially since she didn't even defend it and she had like 3 or 4 chances, maybe 2 or 3 or 4 chances. So this is for the inaugural women's flyweight belt. In my opinion, Valentina already has the belt, but I would have had Valentina fight somebody like, I don't know, Caitlin Chookagian, Jessica Ai, maybe even Sarge, but the Joanna fight just doesn't really make any sense. And not even just because Joanna is the strawweight or was the strawweight champion. It mostly has to do with the fact that Valentina has already beaten Joanna twice. And if you have no idea what I'm talking about, it was back in their Muay Thai career days. I'm pretty sure those fights were at flyweight as well. And yes, Valentina pretty handily beat Joanna twice. And in my opinion, Joanna, I love her, but I don't know, she's just not the fighter she used to be. I would say that she's probably out of her prime at this point. Her last fight against Tecia Torres, yes, she did win, but every time Tecia landed a punch, I was just on the edge of my seat worried that she was going to get dropped. I do think that Rose kind of, maybe not ended her career, but certainly kind of, hurried her out the door. So in this fight, I think we have the best Valentina we've ever seen, the most motivated and hungry Valentina we've ever seen, versus a Joanna that's just kind of getting thrown in here for name value. I really don't understand the matchmaker's purpose in this. Like, what is she going to do, lose and go back to strawweight and fight who? I don't know. It just doesn't really make much sense to me. It's just setting Joanna back for no reason. So you probably already know, yes, in this fight, I'm picking Valentina Shevchenko. I'm even assuming she's going to be a big favorite. Her striking, I would say her striking's better than Joanna. Joanna's kind of famous for her jab and her output of strikes. I think she has the women's strawweight record for like the most strikes landed. But I think against Valentina, all that's just going to get neutralized by the superior striker. And also Valentina has much better kicks. And more power. She even hurt Holly Holm in her fights. I personally even thought she beat Amanda Nunes. People might disagree with me on that, but Valentina, I think, is just the better fighter. That's just all you got to say. And Joanna's certainly not even the fighter she was. I think this fight would have been a lot more competitive maybe 2 or 3 years ago. But now I kind of think they're just throwing it in there just to boost the pay-per-view buys. So yes, in this fight, I've got Valentina Shevchenko by decision. And finally, for the much anticipated main event, we have Max Holloway versus Brian Ortega. This fight was already made a couple times, but Max Holloway had concussion-like symptoms, and he's been injured in a couple of his last fights, and now Max hasn't fought in, I think, over a year at this point. But Brian, on the other hand, knocked out Frankie Edgar a couple months ago. Barely anyone thought that was going to happen, and before that, he submitted Cub Swanson. So he's been on a pretty good streak clearing out the division while Max has been gone. So I definitely think this was the fight to make it featherweight. Max Holloway, some people would say he's the featherweight GOAT at this point. I still think based on resume, you'd probably have to say Jose or maybe even Conor at this point, and I hate Conor, so... but Brian, if anyone was going to beat Max, I think Brian is probably the guy. The thing about Max is people like to paint him as this, like, unbeatable knockout artist with a great chin, and he does have a great chin, but I wouldn't really call him a knockout artist. I mean, he's got good striking, but his style is that kind of, like, eat 2 punches to give 1 punch, and I do think that's kind of caught up with him. But even if you look at his TKO victories, like both against Jose and let's just say Anthony Pettis, it's not like he was just starching those guys. He kind of hurt him a little bit and then finished them with ground and pound. But it's not like he has some Ngannou punch that just puts people to sleep. So you got to think, what is Brian Ortega's strong point? Okay, obviously his jiu-jitsu and submission game. So what is Max going to do if he hurts Brian on the feet? Like, say Max lands his patented 1-2 combo and drops Brian. The likelihood is not going to be that Brian's just immediately asleep. It's going to be that Max would have to follow him to the ground for some ground and pound. But look, Max should not follow Brian to the ground. I think if he follows Brian to the ground, if he hurts him, it's not going to be good for him, and he probably will end up getting submitted. In my opinion, Max is probably going to have to try to edge out some decision where he just keeps Brian away from him and just lands some jabs and you know, punches and kicks to keep distance. So in that aspect, unfortunately, I do think if it goes that route, it could be a boring fight. On the other hand, Max does have really high takedown defense. It's like 83% or something like that. So I think this will be the most difficult guy for Brian to take down. But just like the Conor Khabib fight, I kind of have the same opinion. Like, if Brian gets a takedown, it's most likely over. I mean, this kid is too good on the ground. Very, very good. Great guillotines. And a really good gas tank. You know, most of Brian Ortega's finishes actually come in the 3rd round. So the guy can stick around and be in the fight for a long time. But in my personal opinion, Brian actually has more, you know, paths to victory than Max does. I think Max can only pretty much get a decision here because I think if he drops Brian, you know, he really, really should not follow Brian to the ground, and he's going to know that for sure. But I'm also kind of questioning Max's chin a little bit, just because usually when guys, you know, everybody's like, oh, he has a great chin, and then he starts having all these, like, concussion-like symptoms, and, you know, he always gets hit really hard in his fights, and Brian is a guy that has a lot of power. You know, he knocked out Frankie Edgar. Nobody knew that was going to happen. Like, I picked Brian Ortega to win that fight, but I picked it by sub. I did not think he was going to knock out Frankie. And Frankie's a guy that people thought had a great chin as well. So I could actually see Brian hurting Max, especially early on, because Max usually does get hit a lot early in the first 2 rounds and then turns on the pressure. But unfortunately for Max, Brian's kind of the same way. He usually turns up the pressure as the fight goes on. So I think each guy has a couple paths of victory. I think Brian probably has a little bit more with his submissions. Like, if he gets hurt and dropped, he could get a submission on the ground if Max follows him. If he gets a takedown, he could get a submission. And if he hurts Max on the feet and ends up taking him down after that, he could get a submission as well. I don't necessarily see Brian getting a knockout, but as we know, it could happen. So my personal prediction in this fight, of course I could see Max winning. He's a great champion, but I do think it's most likely that Brian gets a takedown in some aspect and eventually gets a sub. So in this fight, I've got Brian Ortega by 3rd round submission.